The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everyone. See the attendee numbers still climbing here, so we got a few minutes until we'll actually start, but we wanted to at least open things up. Stuart, weren't we trying to get you to do our intro music? That's always on our to-do list, to have a little background elevator music as we wait.
I have music, but it's not being heard by anybody but me.
Yeah, that's what.
I think it would have to be you, Travis, because you are the one that is presenting. So you got some music you want to share. Go ahead.
We got some Taylor Swift fans in the crowd. Looks like the Kansas City Chiefs fans.
Chiefs, go Chiefs.
Oh man, don't even with me.
Oh.
It was a heartbreak for my Bills.
Funny thing is, I like the Bills and the Chiefs, and so either one would have been great. But I'm kind of I have lots of favorite teams. It's just about
really
football.
Want Bills Lions.
Mm-hmm.
That would absolutely guarantee a new Super Bowl winner.
Okay, good. So I was just going to ask someone to test out the question pod, but I see Lisa Johnson already said that she is also heartbroken by her Bills. So we know that the chat window works. I think we probably have chat and question pod. So, Todd or Stuart, do you guys know, is the 1,001 max for attendees a real number? We have a new goal for what we need to attract to break the software again.
Let's hit the 1,001 and we will see. It was the last meeting we got up to 260. I thought it'd go up to 264, but then we were having all those issues at 264, and then once it dropped down to in the 180s, as things started coming back, functionality started coming back. So I think as we approach that, we can get one or two more, but
I'm good with no technical difficulties today, but we'll set it for a future goal of trying to break this new version of the software. Lincoln, I see your question in the chat there. Is there a possibility of recording this training and sending to us to share with staff? And yes, the training will be recorded, and we can shoot it out as a link once it's published, usually about a week after it's or so after it's done, to the attendees, and then you can forward the link to anyone. It's just on YouTube. Let's see, we kind of simmered down on the number there. It's still climbing a little bit, which is fantastic, but we are a couple minutes after, and I have an ambitious amount of information to cover. So we'll go ahead and get going. Welcome all. My name is Travis Kinney. I co-chair this local agency bridge preservation group along with Jason DeRuyver. Say hello, Jason. You're on too, right? There we go. We'll be tag teaming this presentation a little bit today. Jason will also be helping me keep tabs on this the question window and bringing some of those up. I guess I should start by just saying apologies for the last attempt at this. We had actually set a goal to break the software. We didn't think we would actually achieve it. So we actually had enough attendees get on last time that it exceeded what the software could handle, and it went ahead and shut it down. So we have a new platform today, and we should be off and running. So just some housekeeping. As you probably have noticed, you do not have the ability with this software to actually unmute yourself. So we'll have to do the old texting or typing questions into the chat pod. There is a chat window and then also a chat pod or a question and a chat pod. We'll try and keep an eye on both of them, but if you use the question one, that'll probably help. You can see there's already quite a few in there already. The purpose of this training is to, engage at the local level and hopefully provide topics that are of interest to you. So as you're going through this, I'm going to cover a lot today, really pretty quick. And I would suggest that you think of what are other topics you'd like to hear of, and we can bring those back up later. These trainings happen every other month, usually on the third Wednesday. And then the last thing I had on the bullet point there was to discuss we wanted to do a platform change. Well, after we crashed the software last time, we decided definitely platform change is needed. I would take any feedback you have on that. I think the only kind of downside we've had discussed with this is that sometimes you have to register for this platform. But with the number of attendees we have today, it looks like most of you figured it out. So fantastic. So who are we? So this is the Bridge Preservation Partnership, and we are a group of DOTs, local agencies, you got FHWA, academia, industry, and consultants like myself and Jason. And really, we just like to get together and problem solve. And one of the biggest problems that's before a lot of the country is how do you maintain your bridges, right? There's a ton of them out there. They're getting older, and that's a lot of what we work on. Local agencies are a big piece of that, right? Historically, this group has kind of underserved locals. It had a lot more state-centric viewpoint, and when you look at the local agency bridge population, they own half of all the bridges in the country. So it's a huge kind of effort, a huge population of structures that are there. This is a bar graph that kind of shows the distribution of all those local agency bridges, but 310,000 plus of them are out there and need to be maintained. If you look at the bridge condition trends for local agency bridges, this is for the NBI ones, so the 20 feet and greater. I guess I should stop with that. Is that numbers that I showed of the 300 plus thousand, that's only bridges over 20 feet in length. So if you have something that's slightly less than that, it doesn't even get counted into that number. But as an agency, you still are responsible for having to figure out how to maintain it. So of those, what we call NBI bridges, the ones that are 20 feet, this is the condition trends over time. If you look down there, it starts in 1992 and goes up to 2024, which is the last time the data was published. And you can kind of see that what's happened is the number of poor condition bridges, which a lot of us focus on, has stayed relatively flat, right? Those bridges are typically prioritized for replacement. The number of fair condition bridges has steeply inclined, and the number of good conditions has stayed up there as well. So basically, we've added a lot more bridges to the inventory, and a bigger population of those bridges are in good or fair condition. So green is good, yellow's fair, and red is poor. Those colors kind of repeat a couple times here. So I'm going to define maintenance in just 1 second. Probably a lot of folks on this call have a clear understanding of it, but I find some folks don't. But generally, when we talk about preservation or maintenance, we're talking of just keeping what you have in good condition for as long as possible. we're not talking about taking those bridges that are in very poor condition and fixing them, because that usually is a new bridge is what you get with that. So this graph is something that kind of helps you think about, what bridges are my good candidates for maintenance and preservation. And so it's usually those ones that are in that good or fair condition where they're worth saving. They don't need some kind of heroic effort to keep them in service for longer. As you kind of work your way down that condition trend, you might still want to be able to save the bridge, but it might be more of a large scale kind of rehab project where you're having to touch the bridge, most of the bridge, and really put more work to it. So as I kind of alluded to there, what's the purpose of maintenance, right? Maintenance is not all of the wish list stuff, is what I like to call it, right? Maintenance is not the, well, we need a wider road to fix congestion, or we need more ADA ramps, or we need more mass transit, or we need more rocket ships to the moon. I mean, I swear there's lots of different things that people end up looking at maintenance at times to address for us. That's really not the purpose of maintenance. Maintenance is to keep what we have in as good as condition as we can for as long as we can. And so when I try and relate maintenance to folks that are outside of the field of maintenance, I find using a car analogy is really helpful, because when people think of bridges, they don't think of maintenance that often. It's the bridge was built, it's there, and then someday it will be replaced. But in between those two activities, there's a ton of work that needs to happen. And if you kind of use a car to break it down to folks, a lot of them will kind of get it. And so, right, with a car, maintenance is your oil changes, your washing, your tire rotations, all those things that just keep the car in service, right? They're not improving the car, they're keeping it there for in good condition as long as you can. And then you go to the other side there, your rehab is that engine rebuild. When you're not maintaining your car properly, you have all these consequences of expensive things you have to do. And then you go all the way down to the other end where, you have your car replacement, where you just go buy a new one. You could technically skip the maintenance and rehab step if you had the money to do so, right? You could buy the car, you could drive it around for as long as you can, do zero maintenance on it, and then once the tires wear out or the engine explodes, now you're going to replace it, right? And a lot of times we look at our bridges that way, or folks do look at our bridges that way, where it's like, I built it and I'm going to wait till I replace it. What do I need to do in the interim? And there's a lot that needs to be done, so we'll cover quite a bit of it today. So when we talk about bridge maintenance, here's a laundry list of some of the things that fall into that category. I'm going to hit quite a few of these during today's overview. I will kind of stop right there and say, this is high level, but we're going to give you a lot of the tools you need to start some of this work now, but we're also going to point you to resources where you can find more of this, more details on how to perform this work. But bridge maintenance is simple. You're washing the contaminants off the bridge. You're maintaining your bearings. You're doing deck seals and treatments and overlays to maintain the riding surface on the bridge. You're going to go and maintain those joints that are on the bridge deck that keep water and debris from getting down below. You're going to take care of, a lot of bridges have asphalt or membranes on the bridge. You're going to take care of those. Steel needs to be painted to keep from corroding. So doing painting is a big part of maintenance. Concrete patching, bridge drainage maintenance. You got much more. There's tons of different activities that fall into maintenance, but these are some of the maybe more common topics. So a lot of the content we're going to share today is coming from these preservation pocket guides. And you'll see that there's quite a few QR codes kind of throughout. If COVID had one silver lining, it's that these QR codes have become a little bit more useful. And so you can scan these and it'll take you to these preservation pocket guides. So all these links end up taking you to our organization's website, the TSP2 or Bridge Preservation Partnership. And we're going to go into more depth of these pocket guides. But they're a very, very useful tool. These guides were developed by a lot of the folks that I listed off in that first kind of slide there of, you have folks that make the products, you have folks that talk to owners about how to install the products, and you have folks that actually do the installation of these products, kind of all working together to put together a guide saying that we just want these things to work, right? The person that sells the product doesn't want it to fail early. The person that installs it doesn't want it to fail, and the person that owns the bridge doesn't want it to fail. And so putting these three things together really make a difference on extending the life of the bridges, or getting good quality products out of what you install. So the intent of these guides is really, it's an installation guideline. It's meant for the person that's out in the field. It's going to list you through equipment and tools, some limitations and considerations, right? Like, when should I do this kind of a maintenance activity? It's going to talk about if you need some training, although a lot of these are items that you could just go ahead and grab a crew and go out and start working on right away. If there's any kind of technical support, right? There's some activities where maybe you need some engineering involved, and then these guys will try and flag it for you. And then some quality control considerations. Here's a few more examples kind of what, this is some of the deck activities that are related to the pocket guides. You got concrete bridge deck patching, right? That's a very common activity. This guide helps walk you through how to do that properly. Thin polymer bridge deck overlays. So these are commonly referred to as epoxy overlays. You have ultra high performance concrete bridge deck overlays. These might be a little outside the realm of a lot of maintenance crews, but there's a guide out there that could help you. And actually, we had a local agency present before that they were actually indeed using that ultra high performance concrete. Polyester polymer concrete bridge deck overlays. The list keeps going. You got bridge cleaning, repair of bridge concrete substructure elements, maintenance and repair of bridge bearings. You got spot, zone, and overcoating. So this is that kind of spot painting, maintaining those steel structures as long as you can. And then there's still many more. I know I left quite a few off, but if you scan that QR code, and I think it'll show up a few times before we're done here today, but it'll take you to where you could print these out. You can do them in PDF and have that information with you and take it out in the field as you're either inspecting someone else doing the work or you're doing the work with your crew also. You can also download it. Some of these, not all of them I think, but some of them have both Android or applications that are available to go ahead and download and be interactive, where you can have checklists and different things that you're using. They're really a cool resource. This is 100% free. In fact, everything I'm telling you today is all free, right? We're not trying to get any money out of anyone or sell anything. I don't own stock in bridge preservation. This is just, we're trying to spread the word, right? Someone put a lot of work, or a group of folks put a lot of work into making these, and we just want you to know that they're available. So we're going to walk through some of these. Bridge washing, right? This probably sounds like one of the simplest activities that you can do. It has a huge impact on the service life of your bridges, and particularly in regions where you have a lot of de-icing salts or a lot of debris that accumulates on your bridge decks. Washing that off can make a big difference in how long it lasts. So if you kind of look at that table of contents there, you know, it goes through an introduction, a background, accumulation of contaminants, planning and preparation for the work, and then actually conducting the cleaning operation. I'm not going through every bit of these guides, but I'm going to give you the high-level summary, I guess. So here we are, bridge cleaning and washing. You know, the benefits are that you're flushing and washing reduces the potential of those salts or those de-icers getting into your bridge deck or your beam ends or other locations. It's essential just to get the debris out for a lot of your bearings and joints to work, right? You get all that dirt and rock packed into where your bridge joints are, and I've actually seen where it's either broken the bridge itself or broken some reinforced concrete paving coming up to the bridge, because when the bridge wants to, when it gets warm, the bridge wants to expand, and it creates a tremendous amount of force if you don't give it room to do so. Cleaning can also help with your steel coating systems, keeping those clean as well. So some of the things to focus on as you're doing it is decks, joints, curbs, and rails. So that area where you're applying a lot of the contaminants directly. But then also look underneath those joints too. You have your abutments, your beam seats, and your bearings, right? That's where often, you know, if you kept your joints watertight forever, then you wouldn't have any issues down below. But the reality is that joints end up leaking from time to time, and so you can get a real concentration of some of that contaminants at those areas. So it's something to look at also. It goes through some of the considerations, right? So if you have a ton of debris on your bridge, you're probably going to need to remove some of that with some hand methods first and collect that before you flush it. That's usually an environmental consideration. And so there is some environmental regulations that you need to think of. I look at bridge cleaning, at least in the Northwest, as being a real success story for this preservation partnership. I used to work at Oregon DOT, and as attending the partnership, we would hear from all the other regional partnerships. And Washington did this great study where environmentalists had kind of shut down from a permitting process of you can't wash bridges. They didn't quite say can't. They said you can wash your bridges. You just need to collect 100% of all the water you use while you wash your bridge. Well, that turns it into a pretty significant effort, right? If you're trying to clean off a bearing or bean seat like this and you have to figure out a way to collect all of that water, that's basically telling you not to wash your bridge, right? So they did this research study where they measured contaminants. They followed these best practices. They picked up all the big debris, and then they flushed during high flow situations where the stream already had a lot of water going down it. And they said, measure contaminants upstream and measure downstream of us. And if you can tell a difference, we won't do it anymore. And that kind of pioneered a program for permitting, saying that they couldn't tell a difference. So if you follow these best practices, you can start washing your bridges again. I know now Washington actually has a fairly robust bridge cleaning program where they're going through and removing truckloads of debris from some of their bridges, which is a fantastic success story. I know lots of other agencies are doing that as well. And so it's just one of those, once you learn how to get folks on board with doing this kind of simple maintenance and you take the action of I'm going to do it, you can really gain some traction. So underneath the bridge joints, you got bridge bearings. There's a really pretty cool guide on this one. I've done quite a few bearing maintenance, repair, and replacement work in my career. And I'll say that there's really nothing cooler than when you get to jack a bridge up and pull it out and put it back in. It's just something about lifting something that heavy that's just really pretty cool. This guide's got a lot more considerations to go through. But again, like all the guides, it tries to take you from beginning to end. The whole thing is still only 19 pages, so it's not like they're handing you some crazy research thesis that's not particularly useful. This is walking you through basic steps and considerations to maintain your bridge bearings. So the guide will start with, and we will too, a description of what is going on with these bearings. So up there at the top, you got your steel beam coming down, and it's sitting on this sole plate, which is then sitting on a sliding plate, which then is on a masonry plate, which is just a big steel plate that helps spread the load out before it gets back into the concrete abutment or pier cap. And this is an example of one that's actually in fairly good condition, but the whole point of all this, right, is just to allow the bridge to expand and contract as the temperatures swing. If it's not restricted while it moves, everything works well. If things get bound up or frozen, the forces are tremendous, and you'll actually start to see either those anchor bolts shear off, or you'll see the concrete underneath them go, which can get pretty scary pretty quick as you start to actually fail what's holding your bridge up. Another type of bearing, this is a rocker bearing. So kind of a similar application, but instead of sliding back and forth, this one just rocks kind of back and forth on a pendulum, right? So different type of bearing system, but trying to accomplish the same thing. And a roller bearing, so another movable bearing system, but this one has a cylinder there that allows things to move back and forth on top of it. I could see actually this is from the guide. There's a pretty good spall of concrete right above it. You can see where it's that rough end. So I'm going to guess that this one probably had a leaking joint above it at some point. Could have resulted in some damage. So those are your different types of bearings. Cleaning. So cleaning is one of the main things that we like to go after with these, to just maintain them as well as you can. If you get to do a bearing replacement, it's a fairly, it's a pretty good effort to do it. Again, being biased on like it's a cool project to be involved with, that's fun, but if you can just clean it, it's going to be a lot less work for everyone, a lot less cost. And so that's really the whole point of cleaning, is just to keep it from rusting or deteriorating and to keep things moving so that you don't start to break stuff. Anchor bolt tightening. I actually caught in the wind or in the chat pod there that there was a note that, hey, one of those anchor bolts looks loose. So the guide actually talks about that. You know, if you have loose anchor bolts, it could actually cause damage to other components as well. So retighten those anchor bolts is directed. That's something to keep an eye on. I'm going to so this is the before picture of a bearing painting, and I'm going to flip to the after, because I had to do this a few times before I really believed that this was the exact same bearing. But this is before, and so you have that those plates that are supposed to be sliding on top of each other, right underneath that girder. And what happens is when you get to this point where it hasn't been cleaned and the paint has failed, that rust starts to actually really freeze things up. And you can actually put gauges on the bridge and actually start to measure it, but it starts generating really high forces in those girders, in the substructure below it, actually in a bunch of the bridge components that were not ever intended to be there, and they can create real problems. And so this is after painting, so it has been cleaned and painted to allow for some movement to occur again. Cleaning and painting is one aspect of bearing maintenance. Many bearings are actually designed to be lubricated as well. So you can kind of, depends on the bearing type. So some bearings actually have like grease fittings in them. I don't see those installed in modern bearings as often, but you see them in some of the older bearings for sure, where the intent is that you can get in there and you re-lubricate the bearings with some grease on a regular basis. There's some lubricants that really try hard to penetrate between those surfaces to get in there and kind of help things move again. But if you really want to get the lubrication across the surface, you know, you're probably going to need to lift the bridge in order to go ahead and get that clearance. And there's some discussion on bridge lifting too in the guide. So typically, if you're going to lift your bridge, it's time to probably call an engineer and get a plan together for how to do it. One of the challenges that we often face is that these older bridges, they were built and then intended to be replaced after 50 years, and there really wasn't much thought into the fact that, hey, maybe I need to replace these bearings at some point. So you have beam seats that are about just as wide as the bearings, and so when you go to try and find somewhere to put your jacks, often there just isn't a spot that was thought of to have that. Most bridge codes now require you to think of that ahead of time and provide a plan or at least some detailing to allow for jacking. But this is a case where you can see there's a big steel bracket that was added to this so that they could get enough, you know, a leverage on that girder to actually lift it. Some of the things you got to think of when you're lifting is that if you try and lift just one beam, then everything that connects that beam to the rest of the bridge is now fighting you and taking loads that it probably wasn't intended to take. And so it's usually you try and lift all the beams at once. Things like bridge skew. So if you have an abutment that's at this really steep angle, those are pretty good red flags that it's going to really struggle to lift uniformly. It's going to have some problems. There's just a lot of things that go into jacking, but I've definitely had the pleasure of working with several bridge crews that have we partnered together and they've lifted and replaced and maintained their bearings. And so it's definitely not outside the realm of something that falls into maintenance and stuff that can be self-performed even with the proper training. Steel bearings aren't the only ones that have problems. So this is an elastomeric bearing. They kind of look like big hunks of rubber out there. Typically, they're pretty low maintenance. They tend to perform well. They don't really corrode. Usually the issues you see with them are ones that kind of came from the design. So this is what we call walking. And so you can see as the bridge moved back and forth, because of how the friction kind of worked out with how much was holding down on that bearing and how stiff it was, it actually slid a little bit on that concrete. And each time the bridge expanded and contracted, it slid a little bit more, and now it's walking itself out, which can create a real problem. So in that situation, you're gonna have to lift the bridge, you're gonna have to jack it to get that bearing back into place. And then the question is, well, how do you keep it from walking now, right? Well, usually it's a function of how heavy your bridge is to figure out how much that, you know, that bearing's going to stay. You don't want to make your bridge heavier, so you can do something that's called a keeper plate. So here's an example of one that was repaired with the keeper plate. It's just a little steel bar in front of it that's enough to go ahead and create a lip that'll keep the bearing from leaving. And those are just anchored down. One of the biggest actions that can extend the life of concrete bridges, and there's concrete on just about all bridges, is to seal it, right? And so why do we seal concrete? Concrete itself doesn't really care about moisture and contaminants. It's the reinforcing steel inside the concrete that does. So that graph on the left kind of shows all the different things that are trying to work their way into the concrete and work their way down to your reinforcing steel. And once they reach the reinforcing steel and sufficient concentration, you get these corrosion activating. And once the corrosion starts to activate just a little bit, just pops the concrete off the surface. And once it starts going, it just keeps getting worse and worse. And so sealing your bridges is or sealing concrete is one of the easiest ways to extend the life of your bridge. Bridge deck is usually what we refer to on a lot of this, but certainly your rails are another culprit that can get a lot of exposure. If you have leaking joints, sealing things like your beam ends and the abutments underneath can make a big difference. And there's tons of different products out there to seal, and some of them have different purposes. So this is a group of what we would call the penetrating sealers. And what these are intended to do is they penetrate into the concrete and actually turn it hydrophobic. So it actually repels water from it. So these are really pretty cool because you can see the water kind of beat up on the surface and run off. They actually penetrate into the concrete themselves. It gets absorbed into it. And so it's not just right there on the surface, it's actually down into it. It does not fill at least cracks of certain size. So it's not really a crack filler. And then it's going to be something that you're going to reapply on some kind of a cycle. Here's a good example. This is from one of the vendors that's active in the partnership, and they set up this little demonstration here where you can see, two pieces of concrete and basically a water fountain. And the hunk of concrete on the right is untreated. You can see concrete's porous, right? It just wants to absorb that water, and you can see it absorbing into the concrete and presumably working its way towards your reinforcing steel. And the one on the left has been treated with a silane. And so on that one, the water just beads up and runs off. So very simple demonstration, but shows how, something that's put down with just a spray bar. So this is spray bar puts it down. Concrete absorbs it. It doesn't really change the appearance of it. And you can see it here just because it's still wet. Doesn't change the skid resistance. I mean, it goes down really pretty simple. You just spray it on. You gotta, with anything, talk to the manufacturer. What's your application rate for that particular product? But low tech installation, just a spray bar, and you get those kind of results. Other types of sealers are intended to actually go after the cracks and call them crack fillers. So these are typically really low viscosity products like methacrylates or epoxies, and they get poured onto the bridge deck, get either brushes or squeegees to kind of move it around and help it really sink into those crack areas and help fill those cracks that are that real quick avenue for your contaminants to get down to the reinforcing steel. These are most effective when placed early, right? So unfortunately, a lot of our bridge decks, right after they're built, crack. And some of it has to do with some of the concrete material properties. I know that there's been a lot of research to try and make it better, but my experience has been that once you get a brand new bridge deck, you think you're like, oh, I'm good. I don't have to do anything there for just a little bit. But think about it, go out and look at it. Sometimes it's good to get that crack sealing applied right after, maybe a year or two after it's built to seal those cracks and get more life out of that bridge deck. These also need to be reapplied at some kind of a 5-10 year cycle. And one thing to think about with these is you're not building an overlay, right? You're not protecting the whole bridge deck surface. This really goes into the cracks, and then the surface will wear off fairly quickly, where it can still work its way through that porous concrete like we saw with that silane solution. But certainly has its place. I've actually heard some folks experimenting with doing both types of treatments together to try and really maximize that crack filler hydrophobic combination. But there's a guide to talk about some of that. Here's another guide on thin polymer overlays. So this is actually creating a new overlay system on top of the bridge. It makes this barrier to keep, all that water and salts out. These go by different names, but polymer overlays or epoxy overlays seem to be some of the more popular language for them, but they're really fairly thin. They're about 3/8 inch thick when it's all said and done. And they're something that can be installed, without a lot of equipment or training. Thin polymer overlay system, these are very low permeability, so they protect that whole bridge deck against intrusion of moisture, de-icing chemicals, and deterioration. They do actually provide a new wearing surface. So in particular, when they first go down, you have all that new coarse aggregate that gets kind of embedded into that polymer, and it really drives the skid resistance up. They, of course, like most overlays, will wear over time. They're typically considered a fairly low-cost alternative to some of the other overlay types that are out there. And they can definitely be easily installed with maintenance crews. I actually saw a presentation once at a maintenance conference where there was a very motivated, I think it was a county engineer, and he wanted to start doing some overlays, but he didn't have any maintenance crews at all and didn't have money to go out for contract. And so he actually got with the inmate crews, and I got an inmate crew together, got the equipment that they needed, and they successfully installed overlays together with that system. So where there is a will, there is a way. As with any treatment, one of the first things you need to do is look at prepping the bridge deck. So typically a shot blaster is the way to go on this. There's an example of a ride-on shot blaster to the right. What this does is it really removes all the contaminants from the surface. Basically the shot blasters fire steel beads at a high velocity into the deck and then vacuums up the debris behind it. And what it does is it cleans the deck and then creates that roughened surface for the epoxy or the polymer to bond to. The picture on the left is a smaller kind of a scarifier, like a walk behind kind of a device. Obviously buying a shot blaster is probably not something that a maintenance crew is going to do, but if you work with one of your local concrete cutting companies, there's usually fairly economical to have them come out and do that for you. Or if you have a small scarifier, I think you could probably achieve a similar result. What you see over there on the left is they're going back through and cleaning up some of the areas that maybe were missed by the shot blast. Once you get your deck prepped, you're going to go ahead and mix the polymer. And so typically it's like a 1-to-1 ratio, but obviously follow the manufacturer's instructions. And so that first picture there is basically a trash can that they're mixing in. They got a Jiffy mixer that the gentleman on the left is holding, and then 5-gallon buckets that they're using to separate things out. And so they're actually right there just mixing on site, right? You do it in fairly small batches, right? Because this stuff does, depending on temperature, start to take off and harden fairly quickly. And so usually you do like a lane at a time in smaller areas, and you kind of just work your way across the deck. So once you get things mixed up into that bucket, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight this. Mixing is very important. There will be use a timer. I know one supplier that he brings out his own paddle and his own timer to all the projects, because often they'll show up with a mixer, but it's not the right paddle. And it's not like the right paddle is hard to get. It's just that they're like, well, what's the difference, right? Well, mixing's important. Okay, so I'll highlight that on behalf of Greg. Mixing's important, but not high tech. Okay, use a timer, use the right mixer, get it into that 5-gallon bucket or into the larger bucket, and then you start pouring it out on the deck. And that photo on the bottom is using squeegees with notches on them to go ahead and spread the material out to the right depths. Then you broadcast aggregate over the top to refusal. Give it a few hours to cure, sweep it off, and then repeat the process. So these are like, kind of think of it as two really thin coats of the polymer and aggregate to create a 3/8 inch surface when you're all said and done. This QR code does not take you to the pocket guide. Actually, in the pocket guide itself, there is a link, this link, that takes you to a YouTube video that goes into way more depth than what I just went through here. But that kind of gives you the idea of it, is these are very easy to install. But again, you want to install these on decks that aren't in awful condition. If you have a bridge deck that is falling apart, spalling everywhere, this is not going to save that deck. It's not a rehab. This is a maintenance or preservation action. So you're trying to keep a deck that's in fairly good condition from going into bad condition. This is usually stuff that's all short-term traffic control. So you can close down one lane, do that lane, and then switch traffic over to the other side and do the other lane. It's stuff that can be done overnight. Temperatures do make a difference in how fast this stuff goes off. So when it's cold out, it may take longer for you can put traffic onto your lane or reopen the bridge. But definitely cool stuff, good tool in the toolbox. Asphalt, a lot of bridges have asphalt on them. And sometimes we think of the asphalt as being the overlay or protective system, but that's not very accurate. Asphalt's actually very porous, and it's like a big sponge. So it actually kind of holds and traps moisture and contaminants on the bridge deck. It does protect it from wear, right? Because you don't have the tires directly on it, but generally asphalt itself is actually not really helping to save the concrete and reinforcing underneath it. What you need to do is pair the asphalt with a membrane. Lots of different membranes on the market that are out there. There's these polyurea, so spray-on membranes. I liken them to like the spray-on truck liners, very durable. There's polymer membranes, which are actually very similar to like the overlays that I just showed. You just install it first and then put asphalt over the top. And then there's fabric and rolled membranes that are there. There's mopped-on membranes. There's lots of different options out there. But I'm just going to highlight the fabric one because it's one that's fairly straightforward for maintenance to actually do as part of a paving operation. So this is it going down here, and it's just a rolled on, it's fairly durable material, but it's rolled on, and then you can see they're overlapping seams, and they're trying to work from the low end to the high end so that water helps go. Because although these membranes really do adhere well, like getting them perfect is a lofty goal. So you got to think ahead of how you're going to overlap these seams, how you're going to seal things up. But this one product here is a peel and stick. So basically they lay out the length that they're doing, and then you can see that blue film being pulled back from underneath it. They pull that off. Some of the overlays or membranes get rolled down. You got to look at your manufacturer's instructions. The idea is that you're building in that impervious surface into the asphalt so that you don't get the water all the way down to your bridge deck. So here they are. They're putting asphalt over the top. I don't think any of the membrane systems aren't intended to be driven on. Sometimes you're allowed to drive on them temporarily as part of your traffic staging, but the idea is that the membrane goes down and the asphalt goes on top. This particular application here, if you're wondering where's the concrete is, it's a sandwich membrane. So they put a leveling course down of asphalt on the bridge deck. Then they put the membrane down so you had that nice smooth surface to put the membrane on. And then they went ahead and paved over the top. There's also lots of applications where the membrane goes directly on the bridge deck. Bridge maintenance painting. So painting is another big action. Typically when you get into like full scale, we're repainting the whole bridge, it starts to get beyond what we would call maintenance. Because that's a pretty expensive, pretty time-consuming project. Not to like throw the gauntlet down. I know for sure there's maintenance crews out there that could accomplish this. But when we're talking maintenance painting, we're usually referring to spot or zone painting, where you're looking at these smaller locations. Definitely with painting, you need to be very cautious of worker safety and environmental regulations. A lot of the coating systems that are on your bridges out there are toxic. A lot of lead-based paints. They worked good to protect the bridges, but are a pain now that it's time to remove them. You got to contain all that, that lead paint and make sure that your workers stay safe with respirators. So looking at candidates, right? So if you're going to try and do spot or zone painting, it's usually where you have some localized failure. So this is actually out in the middle of a girder. So this is it was done incorrectly maybe the first time it was painted. So you had this localized failure location. The photo I showed here, this was probably underneath a leaking bridge joint. So this was where if you just painted the beam end and the bearing, you're looking pretty good and the rest of the girder looks good. It's pretty rare that you see the entire beam fail at the same time. So when you have these smaller areas, it's things you can do to go ahead and repair them. Prep is very, very important. If you just throw paint over the top of failed paint or rusting areas, it's really just kind of a waste of your time. It's quick to do, but it's kind of a waste of your time. So using some grinding disc or needle guns to go in there and clean the surface off is very important. One of the things that you can see on the left is a vacuum shrouded pack for it. And so what that is it's doing your containment right at the source of generating the pollution. And so that's really handy because like when you see large painting projects, usually they wrap the entire bridge in a tent almost. Well, for doing your maintenance work, that's a lot of effort to go and wrap the deck. And so if you can use something like this, then you can get back to using hand tools and addressing right where you're at. There's recommendations in this guide on tapering the surface a little bit, so kind of feathering your coating, grinding off so you can kind of see the different layers of the coating here. The idea is to get that smooth transition from where you're repairing to where you're not, right? Because we're only going to do some spot painting. And then this photo here on the right, it's, you know, it doesn't have to be high tech and how you apply it, right? So this is like a latticed railing system, lots of uneven surfaces. And so I was actually using like a wash mitt here to go ahead and coat those bars with the coating on it. Take a look at the guide if this is something you guys are going to jump into. Like I said, prep is important, and then applying the coating to the proper thickness and the proper number of coats is also very important, as well as picking the correct paint. A lot of agencies have like a qualified products list that you can look at and just copy off of that. Oh, they use this for maintenance coating. It's probably a decent product for you guys to look at as well. But like more is not always better, right? I've seen some painting situations where it was just gobbed on and had unfortunately some early failures because it was just installed so thick it never cured properly, and it just was not what it was intended to, or how it was intended to be installed. Okay, so pocket guides. I'm going to wrap up here with a few extra slides and then we'll get into questions. Again, QR code to those pocket guides. Very, very useful information. I strongly suggest taking a look at those. So that QR code came up again. In addition to the pocket guides, which I've been hitting pretty hard, there's these training videos. And so today's training is going to be recorded and put on here. And there's, I think if I say thousands, I'm exaggerating. There's definitely hundreds and hundreds of these training videos. They're put into different categories and put online. And so the thing with these training videos that's cool, they all just take you to links on YouTube. But this partnership's been happening for a long time for bridge preservation, and at all these regional meetings, folks give presentations and case studies on, you know, what worked and what didn't work. And these are folks that are, you know, could be considered experts in their field. And it gets recorded. The video gets put into these categories online in this video library that's accessible through the Bridge Preservation Partnership website. And then there's also a link to the presentation itself, which is there. So you can download the presentation if you want to see the slides. But very useful. There's also the who gave the presentations there as well. So if you want to reach out to whoever it was, it's, you know, my experience has been that folks are excited that someone even looked at what they what they provided and are more than happy to go ahead and offer some advice or some suggestions on whatever your particular challenge is. But if you look at all those different categories of topics there, from decks, joints. There's a whole local agency category specific. You probably are thinking of what you have for your bridges, and you have problems that fall into these categories, and you might be able to find some answers right there. There's also regional partnership meetings. So these meetings are coming up. Every year, each of the 4 partnerships, so Southeast, West, Northeast, and Midwest, put together it's usually like a half-day, full-day, half-day kind of a conference where they get together in breakout sessions, and there's certainly training topics that happen there, and local agencies are having more and more impact on them, on attending those. I'll say that the partnership as a whole is trying really hard to encourage local agencies to engage, because we feel like there's a lot we can learn from local agencies, and a lot that local agencies can gain from being part of this partnership. So these are the dates and locations that are there. If you have any interest in attending these, throw something out into the chat. These are, you have to register for these, but often some of the partnerships will actually go as far as either sponsoring or doing reduced registration rates for a lot of local agencies, especially if they're in that area, right? So that's the list of the ones that are there. And good. I was trying to leave some time for some questions, so I'll put, that's my email address there. The TSP2. Ooh, I thought I updated that. Our website is currently in the process of rebranding, so you'll see us say the word TSP2 a lot. That is what the working group was originally founded as. It has migrated to the Bridge Preservation Partnership. I believe that link will still get you there. But yeah, and then there's email address for Jason as well, my co-chair on this working group, tremendous resource as well. So, okay, take a quick break on that. Do we have, Jason, have you been looking at some of the questions here? Do we have any that we should share with the group?
I've been furiously answering them in the background. I have not got to the most recent one on asphalt overlays and increased weight on the bridge deck, maintaining precast concrete culvert structure. So probably just go through these verbally, and I can type something in so there's a record.
Perfect, thank you. Maintaining precast concrete culvert structures. So culverts are really tough, right? Because they're buried. And so from a maintenance standpoint, your easiest access to seal the top is already removed now. So if you ever do have a reason to reconstruct the roadway on top of them, I suggest installing some waterproofing on the outside. From a culvert rehab or maintenance standpoint, there are a few things that I've seen done. When you get deterioration happening inside where it's losing its structural capacity, you can go through and actually do it's like a shotcrete kind of a liner and build a new structural liner inside the culvert. That's one thing you can do. Sometimes you have issues with these culverts where you have a bunch of water that tries to get, or that is on the outside of the culvert and is draining through. So usually there's like a weep holes that are inside of them to try and let some of that water out. Those weep holes can get clogged at times, which can cause some damage. They can also let if they don't have like a filter kind of built into them, they can let some of the material from behind the culvert come through, wash out, right? And then you can get a hole behind it. And so Jet Filter is one of the companies that's involved with the Bridge Preservation Partnership, and they have a post-installed weep hole that they can install that has that filtering, and some of them have the one-way valves and stuff that can do some work with that. How do you folks feel about aluminum mastic or rust converter as a limited measure to treat rusty beam areas? That is a great question, Michael. I'm going to claim that I don't have enough expertise on this to provide a good answer. I will say that we have a coatings working group. That's another subsection of this partnership. That would probably be a fantastic place to ask that. And I'll kick it to you, Jason. Do you have an opinion on alumina, mastic, or rust converter?
Well, in a limited capacity, we'll overcoat bearings, when we're working on concrete patching substructure units with an aluminum mastic. We'll just give it an overcoat to protect it. And then earlier in the chat, it was expressing some of the experience we've had in the HRCSA paint that is more of an overcoat. I mean, that has its drawbacks too. I mean, unless you're doing the traditional blasting and 3-coat system, every system you try is going to have a maintenance system. Is, you know, you get what you pay for. It's going to have limited effectiveness. But if you're just looking for a stopgap, I mean, some of these things are okay. I mean, but on small basis, you know, like I said, with the aluminum mastic, we just use that on bearings when we're doing substructure repairs locally to the bearing and nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say that the most common guidance I've had is that the preference is to remove the existing coating and do a new installation or an overcoating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sealant for graffiti removal. There are some products, right, that are supposed to help with graffiti removal. I know it's a huge headache for maintenance. At one time of my career, I called it urban art because it felt like it was a never-ending battle, and just tried to suggest that we leave it. I would guess that it's usually easier to brief coat over it than to have something that works so well to wash off. Okay, what I don't see in the chat anywhere is what would y'all like to hear about next time? So we've given trainings on bridge joints. We've given a lot of different trainings out there. We've covered a lot of different topics today. Are there any of them that you would love to see us go into in more depth? Our last training was on bridge scour. That video is recorded and posted. That was fantastic. Okay, we got cable stayed bridge maintenance. I got a question here on how would you go about cleaning a large amount of bird feces off a truss over a river? And so for that, it's going to fall into that category. You're going to have to capture most of that debris first. Well, I can start with my disclaimer.
Let it down first, because you don't want particles getting airborne. We did it. We used a vac truck and a snooper truck simultaneously, and we wet it down, and then we vacked it off. But we had but this wasn't a truss bridge. This was a I-beam bridge that had a foot of the bird feces was a foot thick on the bottom plan. Yeah. So it came off like giant chunks of granola bar.
Ew, gross. Yes. I was going to stop by saying you need to pay very close attention to the health safety requirements and environmental requirements, but generally it's not going to be the answer of you can just go ahead and hose it all off into the river below. You're going to have to do some hand removal for a lot of that work. I got a question on, do we have any info on wood bridges? We actually gave a training on timber bridge maintenance and repair here just recently. So at one of those links that we've sent out, you can actually see that video. And if there's more detail you want on timber bridge maintenance, I will corny say that I have a soft spot for rotted timber. So we could always provide more on that. Okay, great. We're getting lots of good suggestions in here. We'll go through these and start to come up with some additional stuff. And we had 300 plus attendees today. That is awesome. Thank you all for attending. We'll send out Nancy or Stuart, we'll be able to send out an email to all the registrants, right, with the contact information and the video link once we have it uploaded, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Perfect. And then I guess since we have your contact info, we'll keep you on the list for future trainings. And if there's any point where you would like to not get information on those, let us know and we'll drop you off the list, no problem.
We feel like we've gotten pretty much all of the questions answered. If there's more questions that people have that you're still on and you want a little more information, you can feel free to, anything you do, you can route through NCPP, or you can email Travis and Jason. I'm sure you guys are always willing to answer questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their information.
Oh, we got a message here too from one of the suppliers that are in a group that I did not cover here that I should mention before we close up, is that this partnership has a great relationship and supported by folks that actually make these products, right? A lot of the concrete patching and joint sealing and you name it, there's someone in our group that provides it. And they love to do demonstrations. We do demonstrations at some of these regional or national meetings where they come out and you get to try out products. And a lot of them, if there's interest, they'll come to you and help work with your crew to go through and install a segment of joint seal or a sealer or paint or whatever it is. Because like I mentioned before, they are very invested in you having a good success. None of them want to sell you their product once, right? They want you to use it successfully. And a lot of times that comes to some training. And so I know a lot of times we would welcome folks out to Oregon, and we'd bring a bunch of crews together and do a afternoon of training with the supplier. So I would also suggest if you have any current products that you're using that you're struggling with or certain repairs, throw those out to us too, and we can try and get you plugged in with the right folks.
Jason, or Travis, either one of you, real quickly, there is a question. Has there been any effort to add sacrificial zinc anodes to steel members to prevent rusting?
Sacrificial zinc anodes to the steel members? Absolutely. Yeah. You can do passive or impressed current systems. And I've seen them, there's certainly been a lot of work done for steel and for reinforced concrete when you're in those high corrosion environments. So maybe that would add to one of those topics we could bring an expert on.
Yeah, because I have not seen anodes applied to steel members personally.
Yeah, we had one here recently where it was in a highly corrosive environment and worked with one of the corrosion experts to help us design a system for that.
And we certainly have corrosion experts that are part of our industry member group that are certainly willing to, if you email us, we can get you some information, contact information for them too. Any of us can.
Okay, well, we are at 10 o'clock Pacific, which means we have run out of time. I would like to thank you all again for showing up today and engaging with all these great questions, and I hope that you'll consider showing up for the next one.